All right, so apparently, and I just needed to verify. However, and mind you, it's a trigger warning, so make sure that you log off if you're not ready for the triggers that you're about to receive right now. So as somebody who is experiencing domestic violence, has experienced domestic violence, it's really difficult to get any sort of assistance because our federal government and state governments are set up in such a way that you need to verify addresses, you need to verify all kinds of bullshit just to get assistance, right? And when you're leaving a domestic violence situation, oftentimes you don't have any of that. So I hear a lot on the news about people asking to help save the postal services and that money is being defunded from the postal services. And I also have those people who are boycotting things like the UPS store. And I'm going to tell you right now, the UPS store is literally the only option for some of us to get a mailing address because of domestic violence. It's that simple. The US Postal Service has no right to complain about losing services or to make campaigns and waste money campaigning to try to get people to use the US Postal Service more than they do things like, let's say, UPS, FedEx, and so on and so forth, which also get used by the US Postal Service. However, they are separate entities and they have their own post office boxes. We can go as far as to see that we're now developing FedEx stores with post office boxes, postal annexes with post office boxes, or they call them post mail boxes, because you can't use the PO box because essentially that's solely for the US government, which sets you up to be investigated for criminal activity if you choose those routes instead of getting the post office route. But I just took two things that have long-lasting addresses. I took my vehicle registration that has a working address that we've had for 32 years. It's just not a residential address, so they wouldn't let me use that. And then the other one that does have my home city and zip code. However, on the insurance documents, because I get them to my mother's PO box, they go to her PO box, and that's the main address. But it does have it down below. And if the US government investigated, that was my residence. So essentially, because I'm going through this DV stuff where I don't want to get a letter sent to that house to be able to get a post office box to be able to receive my mail, victims of domestic violence get fucked over on receiving their mails. And a lot of times mail gets used against them by their abusers to be able to manipulate them, to be able to continue to have access to them, to be able to continue to make them uncomfortable with situations. And if it wasn't for the fact that I still need to get my mail in those addresses, I would literally be no contact with my entire family. But because of how our government system is set up, and I even told the guy who was ringing me up, I'm like, you do understand that this is stupid because you have both addresses. The PO box we've had for over 40 years, and the 138 North Calumet 32 years, and the other address, Wildemar, we've had for over 20 years. So the government has that information. It's there on our credit report and all of that shit. So to deny a person a mailbox because of that is a literal offense against domestic violence victims. And it's not, I didn't want to make a big deal and get into detail with him, because then he would have been like, well, you see, it's not your address. Yeah, but you're forcing us to lie about where we still live when we're trying to get safely away from our abusers. And when we're homeless, it makes it very, and I'm going in that particular aspect, all homeless individuals get fucked by our postal services. They get fucked by DMV when there's those things where they remove all camps, you know, where they take their houses, their camp setups and things like that. IDs get lost, social securities, birth certificates. So oftentimes homeless people have to be constantly requesting these things because they either get thrown away or they get stolen because you're homeless. So essentially, the way the government is set up and the way the postal service is set up, it's set up to help the abusers. And I'm not just talking about domestic violence abusers. I'm talking about the government itself. It's set up to continue to abuse its people. So why is the government working like this? Well, because essentially, to never fix the homeless problem serves the government. It serves it. And I won't go into that whole thing, but domestic violence serves the government as well. All of these things that Christian nationals try to do to women to keep them suppressed is the same things, is why the government won't change these policies for the better. It's why places like this post office place is like, well, it's the government. He washes his hands from it like he has no power. Sir, you have more power than the homeless people. You have more power than the domestic violence people because you work there. And this is a systematic problem. So why are we still funding these postal stores or mail services if they're not catered to service all of the American people? They should be set up in a way that caters all American people, not just housed American people. And I'm going to say that again. The U.S. Postal Service is run by the U.S. government and is the reason most of us cannot get a P.O. box because of their standards. Even if you have a lasting address, my entire life we have used the P.O. box because my mom had it since before we were born. So all credit card, all important documents go there. I don't get mail at home, and I definitely do not get mail at her work. Well, now I kind of get some letters at her work to pick up my mail in one place, but it's like most of my mail my entire life has gone to the P.O. box. The only ones I can prove are the 138 Calmia that he won't let me use because it's not a residential area, and the P.O. box. Those are the two where I can be found, where my mail can be found. So therefore, it's not about having everything that they request. It's about being able to prove where your physical body is going to be, which should not be a standard for receiving things like a P.O. box. Because essentially, if you can't even get a post office box, you can't get an ID. If you can't get a post office box, you can't get a driver's license. You can't get your social security if you need to replace your social security card. You know, there's so many things making it more and more difficult. So you guys can lie about how you are trying to solve the homeless crisis, but I'm going to tell you that the way every system, Medi-Cal, Medicare, Social Security, our registration system for birth certificates, the post office box, schools, aid resources, if they are government funded, you get fucked. You get fucked many times trying to get services. So obviously it's not about helping people leave homelessness. That's not what you want. You want there to be criminals, you want there to be drug addicts, and you want there to be people who have given up on life because of how difficult it is to get back on that horse once you have lost your home, your funding, and your resources. And I just needed to prove it, you know. I needed to prove that that was the thing that they were doing, because essentially I couldn't prove that it was that last year, because last year when I first got my first UPS post office box, I was running from the domestic violence. But I even told the social worker that that's what they do. and not social worker, but the ECM worker that kept sending me to these things and sent me to be harassed by UPS store in Riverside County, also to be harassed by police officers when I was trying to eat in that county. So I can honestly say that I'm done trying to defend the post office box people, because essentially I gave them another opportunity, showing them the documentation that it is valid documentation. It's very valid. I ended up having to use it whether I wanted to use my abuser's address. I still had to use it for things like getting my car registered and things like that, when in fact it shouldn't be policy. It shouldn't be policy. And everything, even the way 211 is set up, the way that these services for homeless people, safe parking, the NAMI houses, all of these different services are set up in such a way that keep people stuck. Instead of helping people, they give you all these lists, but half of the time, one or two things are things that I qualify for, and it doesn't help get my mail or get housing. That's all on me. So the fact that I don't have 5 years at least of renters thing fucks me on those two that I could have qualified for, because there is no policies that aid in them helping you get through that application process. And if you don't have renters stuff, that's one of the main reasons they say no to you. And the other one is not making 2 to 3 times the amount of rent. So they have nothing instated to help people out of that. So they keep you houseless for as long as possible until you're desperate enough to put your life at risk. If you're like myself, disabled, to put my life at risk and lie on my work applications and lie to my employers like I did before about how serious my conditions were, and then put myself at risk to get injured. Put myself at risk to continue driving, knowing that my eyes are fucked up and knowing that I've had several accidents because none of my doctors have helped me. Y'all, with the way your system is put up, keep putting us all at risk. You put every single person in the general population at risk by keeping people homeless. At this point, we can honestly say that the government's insistence in not solving the homeless crisis is the government's insistence on putting the entire American population at risk of crime, deficits, and illness. Okay? They are at fault. You can honestly say, we already knew it. But my case, if you go step by step following my case since I finally reported the domestic violence that was going on, my entire case demonstrate that the government is not set up in a way to help its people. It's set up in a way where you have to be defending yourself from said government. You have to be defending yourself from police officers, from city systems, from all kinds of stuff, instead of having those services as an American. So why do you want people to continue to pay these taxes if you don't actually keep the American people safe? Because you need criminals, because otherwise you wouldn't need police officers. It's that simple. You need to criminalize people to be able to keep your jobs. So you yourself, by not recognizing and waking up to this and saying, you know what, I would rather you service the homeless people than me have more hours as a police officer to be going around. But how many of you guys are marching with those people to help them change policy? How many of you are helping domestic violence people instead of helping the abusers? Because my abusers did use the legal system to be able to further abuse me, and the legal system did help them do it. The Temecula Valley legal system helped them do it. So honestly, you could at least let us get our mail in a safe place where we no longer have to put up with our abusers. If you're not going to give us housing, if we're going to have to be forced to live in such a way where we're not even treated with dignity, you should at least have special post office boxes for people who are victims of domestic abuse, because I have all the paperwork at that. If they would have asked me for that, that has all those addresses on there. I could have used those legal documents, but that's not acceptable documents on the list. Victims of domestic abuse, minimum, need services that will assist them not fall back in to domestic violence. And I bet you that would solve at least 30% of the homeless crisis. And I'm making up that number, but just based on how many people, 3 out of 10 people that I meet on the streets are homeless because of domestic violence. 3 out of 10. And I've been on the streets since June of last year, or July of last year again. And again, I'm seeing the same thing. 3 out of 10 people are on the streets because of domestic violence, not because of drugs. Then you have 5 out of 10 people that may be domestic violence and just couldn't afford to keep paying rent. Those are the people living in their cars. The ones who can still afford to have their cars because they're working homeless people. So just keep that in mind, because you guys keep making all these policies and you keep making all these ideas that homeless people are the problem. Homeless people are not the problem. Your government is the problem. Not just your city government, but also your state government and your federal government, that make it impossible for us to get proper housing, jobs, bank accounts, medical services, our IDs, our social security, and everything. And in some of the domestic violence cases, that's one of the main things that their abuser takes from them: their passport, their IDs, and their birth certificates. They remove any access for them to be able to open a bank account, to be able to save money to get away from the abuser. So just keep that in mind, because you guys are enabling abusers. You, the government, the US government, is enabling abuse by not finding policies that protect abuse victims from having to go back to their abusers to get their mail. Because then you have to depend on them being honest enough to give you all your mail. And that's not always the case. So just keep that in mind, because the US government has a lot to do. And I just demonstrated it once again by I didn't want to try to use those addresses because they are my abusers' addresses, but I did it anyways, despite the fact that it was making my stomach churn, because I knew it wasn't right, because I am homeless and I cannot prove that I have residency. But those documents prove that I did have residency when I got my insurance and when I registered the car. So just keep that in mind, because you guys make it impossible for domestic violence victims to leave their abusers, and then you talk shit about how long it takes them to leave their abusers. And then you have the audacity to have opinions about how long it takes domestic violence victims to leave their abusers, whether it's a parent, a sibling, an aunt, a family member, or their spouse. Every single one of you in these systems and in these family systems are enablers of abuse. So just keep that in mind. I love you and have a beautiful day.